And hello, everybody. This is Paul Adams again, coming to you with Jim Jatras, a former U.S. diplomat and also an advisor to the GOP Senate leadership on foreign affairs. He can be found by just Googling him, Jim Jatras. He's on Chronicle Magazine, RT.com, ABCNews.com, The Duran, Strategic Culture, and neweurope.eu. Jim, it's always a pleasure and a treat to have you here to discuss geopolitics. This will be our sixth rendezvous, our sixth conversation. So we must be doing something right if we're getting along so far.
Well, I think we're a perfect match, Paul. Between you and me, we have two normal haircuts.
Well, listen, I know you've been a regular on RT, and recently you have commented on NATO, which is a bureaucracy looking for a problem to solve. Can you start off maybe generally with the current state of affairs in NATO and the U.S.?
Sure, and let's take as our touchstone on this our attitudes toward President Trump. You were definitely off the Trump train a long time ago.
Well, having been a very ardent, vociferous supporter of Trump back in the day, 2015, 2016, I jumped off the train on April of 2017 when he fired the 59 missiles into Syria.
Yeah.
I knew it was game over.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
How about you? Are you still on the
train? I declared I was off the Trump train when Assange was arrested. I am off the train in terms of having very large positive expectations from him that he will fundamentally change the course on which this country is bound, which is, I don't hold a very rosy scenario future for our country on a number of fronts. We can get to those later. I still think that it is the sad fact that of all the possible alternatives, they're all worse. That certainly any Democrat will be worse, and any respectable Republican to replace him, who can't get elected anyway, by the way, will also be worse. While I will find myself, in all likelihood, the civic-minded sap that I am, voting for him again in 2020 if he's still on the ballot and still in office. However, I don't have any great expectations that he can change the course of this country. But whether he leaves in office in 2020, 2021, or 2025, that the path of the downward slope to a very dystopian future for our country is almost inevitable at this point.
Well, this is the part that is very lamentable for me, because I know back in 2015, you were, I think, vying for the vice presidency at some point.
And thrown my tinfoil hat into the ring, yes.
Yes, and this is the part that I do not understand. You have a gentleman as you, well-educated, with all the credentials in the world, former diplomat, astute, wise, broad-thinking, who would have made a fantastic representative for the United States as president of the United States. And here you are, you're not running. What is the problem with that picture?
Well, the vice presidency, of course, that was a bit of a, let's say that a little tongue in cheek. I mean, I would be happy if lightning had struck, which it did not. But I think there not only myself but many other people. I know dozens of people that could have staffed this administration that would have been accord with the views that he enunciated in 2016. Instead, he goes and packs his administration with all these neoconservatives and Bush retreads, and we end up with essentially a continuation of the Bush and Obama administrations, which brings us maybe to our opening topic, which is NATO. I can remember very distinctly that he talked about NATO being obsolete, and I remember on the very day he was inaugurated, that they were trying to ram through the Senate the approval for Montenegro because they did not know what he was going to do. They were afraid. When I say they, I mean the establishment, the deep state. The people have been trying to neuter him, I think successfully, unfortunately, and remove him, not yet successfully, for all these years. They were terrified he would actually mean what he said, that NATO is obsolete. We should have nothing to do with it. Maybe we should even get out of it. And so they were trying to get Montenegro in that very day while he was taking the oath of office, and only because of Rand Paul and some other people that I won't mention working on the outside was that forestalled. And of course, they need not have worried, because as it happens, they were going to approve it anyway, and now have expanded it to include the so-called North Macedonia on top of Montenegro. And of course, the door remains open for Ukraine and Georgia, which would simply mean World War III. There's no question that the Russians would go to war to stop either of those countries becoming part of NATO. So, I don't think we should get into, Paul, the question of why did he appoint all these bad people, except to note that it doesn't really matter why. Whether,
Well,
he was mistaken, maybe he's stupid, maybe he is corrupt, maybe he is surrounded by people that would kill him otherwise. When all said and done, he populated his administration with people who were foursquare against everything he ran on, and they are determining the course of policy. They've turned NATO obsolete into make NATO great again. Let's have more burden sharing, pay more money for defense against nobody in particular. And that's what we've got now. That's all there is to it.
Well, in retrospect, in hindsight, I think to dovetail with what you just said, I think Trump was an accidental president who came into the scene without knowing what he really didn't know. And he was educated very quickly, probably by Kissinger and maybe with some meetings with some men in black suits who gave him the lowdown on what's what. They told him, we have the military-industrial complex that needs to be fed. We also have the central banks that need to issue loans to the central government. We also need the media to control the narrative. And basically, you do as we tell you, or else, there's this little clip we'll show you here of JFK. This is what can happen to a president.
Quite possible. And even if it wasn't as dramatic as that, he's got to be aware of that. And
sure.
And the other thing is, and I'm not going to let him off the hook in the sense that he may have been arrogant enough to think that it doesn't matter, that I can hire the best people, but I make the decisions without any sense of how that really cripples him. I mean, to take one case in point, all this business, and this shifts to the impeachment question right away. A little bit is that you got these guys Fruman and Parnas, who were Giuliani's informants on Ukraine. They're being targeted by the Justice Department that works supposedly for Donald Trump. Now, why is it that his personal attorney is under threat and the people cooperating with him are under threat? They're trying to help him by Trump's underlings in the executive branch of government. If you read Article 2, Section 1, Clause 1 of the Constitution, it doesn't say the executive power of the United States is vested in the federal bureaucracy or the intelligence community or the foreign service. It says it's vested in the president. But in fact, he controls virtually nothing in his own government, as far as I can tell.
Well, the fact of the matter, though, is that he does have purview over some tentacles that do the bidding for him, his fixers, shall we call them. I think William Barr is one of them. They try to protect the president. That's why he picked them.
I think they try to in a limited and pathetic way. Again, look at let's start with the IG report that's going to come out from Horowitz. I think all the indications are that's going to be a dud, and maybe Barr is trying to push for it to be a little more hard pressing on FISA-gate and what led to the beginning of the whole Russia did it hoax and all that. But anybody who thinks that Clapper and Comey and Brennan and all these people are going to get marched off in orange jumpsuits doing the perp walk is sadly mistaken. That's never going to happen.
Okay, that's a different matter. What do you think of the impeachment hearings coming up tomorrow in the Judiciary Committee?
I think what they're going to try to do is pick up the ball from the Intelligence Committee, say, okay, now we have the facts on the table, and here is the legal framework and the constitutional framework that leads to impeachment and removal of the president, and we've checked all the boxes. So that basically, this is more of a procedural case that they're making now to take the factual basis they believe they got from the hearings and to plug it in to the constitutional and legal framework to say that the criteria for impeachment have all been met. And that's all we'll say. Well, the first thing we're going to hear from is a bunch of legal experts. We're all going to say, oh, yes, absolutely. This is a slam dunk case.
Well, according to the statement released by Schiff, quote, they say the evidence is clear that President Trump used the power of his office to pressure Ukraine into announcing investigations into his political rival, former Vice President Joe Biden, and debunked conspiracy theory that it was Ukraine, not Russia, that interfered in the 2016 election.
Yeah.
So,
this is, by the way, a very interesting sleight of hand here when they say Ukraine, not Russia, as though the two were mutually exclusive. Although I don't believe the Russians did interfere in our election, but what they're trying to say is, for example, that the Republicans believe in a conspiracy theory that all the bad things attributed to Russia were really done by Ukraine instead. So it was Ukraine that hacked the DNC server rather than the Russians, when in fact, I think it's quite clear that nobody hacked the DNC server. And that, I think the real problem for Trump is that the Republicans, not a one of them, as far as I know, will dispute the narrative when it comes to Russia and Ukraine.
Okay, but let me interrupt you here. Isn't this all ancillary to the main case here? The basis of this case, the Ukraine-Russian thing is moot, because what we're looking at here is a president who used his power, his influence, to try and sway the election to his liking by investigating his rival, Joe Biden. That's the essence of the case.
That's what they're claiming. And the thing is, that's if you said, if the president abused the power of his office to get a foreign government to investigate his rival, that would be one question. If the nation's chief law enforcement asked a foreign government to look into corrupt wrongdoings by an American citizen,
that's different.
Abusing the power of his office, that would be a perfectly legitimate thing. Which was it? I would say it was the latter. In other words, you have the son of the sitting vice president and the point man for Ukraine using his father's office to enrich himself and, I would say, the Biden family, and abusing, by Biden's own admission, threats of U.S. government aid in order to protect that son. That would be a credible allegation, and I think the facts support that, and I think, in fact, that's what Trump was doing. The fact that Joe Biden is running for president does not grant him immunity from such investigation.
Granted, Joe Biden and his son are culpable. The point is, should a president be able to attack, destroy his rival by calling on a foreign power to investigate this rival for potential misproprieties?
That's the back to the first way framing the question. And the other thing, again, underlying this, and this reason I think it does come all the way back to Russia and Ukraine, is that the underlying basis of everything the Democrats did in the Judiciary Committee, supported by all the administration witnesses and the Foreign Service officers and so forth, is the idea that there's some sort of God-given right of Ukraine to have aid from the United States, and specifically military aid against those evil, dastardly Russians. And anything less than that is treason, is basically supporting the Russians, our sworn enemy, against our ally Ukraine, which of course Ukraine is not an ally since we have no alliance with Ukraine. And that's what I think, Paul, is the underlying problem for Trump, because not a single Republican will dispute that. They'll all be coming back to, well, you can't prove a quid pro quo, and maybe he shouldn't have done that, but it wasn't impeachable. That's pretty thin gruel.
I don't think Trump cared two whits about the Ukrainian economy or Ukrainian military.
Nor should he.
No. I think he only was concerned about his rival, Joe Biden, because he was rising up in the polls and he wanted Joe Biden destroyed.
I think that's one way to look at it. And like I say, and the other part that everybody keeps skipping over is CrowdStrike and what was the Ukrainian role in 2016. And this, again, where the major media all saying this is a conspiracy theory, although it's quite clear. You notice that the name Alexander Chalupa didn't come up much in the hearings, or the Ukrainian ambassador, a guy named Chayi, who was there at the time, who were helping to get the Steele dossier around town and were integral to the start of the Russiagate, the Russiagate
Right.
hoax perpetrated on the American people. And again, this is direct, not only Ukrainian, but I would also say particularly British
Right.
foreign intervention in our election in collusion with elements of the intelligence community and probably up through the Obama White House as well.
How about Israel? Is Israel at all implicated?
They could be. I've heard allegations of Israeli implication. I don't know what the connection there would be. I think part of the problem there is that, again, if we're talking about Israel, are we talking about Prime Minister Netanyahu, who, of course, has a very close relationship with Trump and Jared Kushner and so forth? Or are we talking about some elements in Mossad, for example? Like, for example, I think it's quite clear to anybody who's paying attention that the whole Epstein enterprise was.
And also, we're talking about Psy Group and Cambridge Analytica and
exactly.
APAC.
And this is where almost every country of any substance has its own deep state problem.
Sure.
That you have political leadership, and then you also have the permanent apparatus of government.
Now, with regards to CrowdStrike, this is immaterial, but CrowdStrike is a publicly traded company based in California. For those of us who don't know this,
right?
So it's not like it's owned by the Ukrainians.
No, and somehow they got off on this tangent. Is the server in Ukraine? I have no idea what that is supposed to mean. I don't think that's really the issue. I think the real issue is what was the role of CrowdStrike, the Ukrainians and the British, with people in the Justice Department, in the FBI, in the CIA, in putting together this Steele dossier. For example, even Trump's defenders will say matter-of-factly that Christopher Steele put the Steele dossier together from his Kremlin sources. There's not an iota of evidence that the Kremlin or any Russians had anything to do with the information in the Steele dossier, other than Steele say so. What, a British spook wouldn't lie about something?
In the meantime, Hillary's server in her basement was hacked 6 ways from Sunday by every country in the world.
Nobody cares. And I think, Paul, this is what really gets down to is that, and this is why I'm not particularly optimistic that either the Horowitz IG report is going to amount to anything or this much vaunted Durham report is going to blow them all out of the water, is that when all is said and done, there's a certain class of people with Hillary Clinton's name at the top of the list who will never be held accountable. I don't think Hunter Biden will ever be held accountable. I don't think any of the people in that charmed group
they're
will ever be held accountable. They're Teflon. But then I say, why is it that as soon as Rudy Giuliani starts getting this close to something uncomfortable, his informants get raided by the feds? How come Roger Stone gets picked up like Osama bin Laden with an armed SWAT team coming into his house? There are two standards of justice, and I think for all his faults, Trump is perceived by the establishment as an avatar of that flyover American identity that is doomed for extinction, and he scares them, not because of what he's done or even is capable of doing, but because what he represents, and he must be destroyed one way or the other.
Well, there's a counter theory to this. I'll be thinking about it very carefully here. This process of selecting a president comes with certain packages. For example, Hillary wouldn't have been a very good president for these reasons. All her dirty laundry was already out in public view. We knew about Libya. We knew about the arms sales to terrorists in Syria. We knew about the pay for play with her foundation. We knew about the private server in her basement. We knew about the stolen primaries from Bernie. What else was there? We knew everything about Hillary. So the mob, let's call them the cabal, the mob, the syndicate, whoever you want to call these people who are controlling the levers of power at the very top, they had nothing on her. They couldn't blackmail her to force her to go this way or that way. Trump, different story, Trump. Okay? They had something on him, obviously, that wasn't out in public view, that he didn't want to be implicated on, and obviously they figured Trump would be a better president because he's more manageable.
Oh, I actually, Paul, I'm not. That could be, but I think that's a speculation. I'll go back to what you say earlier. I think he was an accidental president. He wasn't supposed to get elected. He wasn't a selected president. He was an accident. He wasn't supposed to win. Even he didn't think he was going to win.
No, he didn't.
And so we end up with this guy. And again, I think that's why we do see this kind of manic hatred and panic from the ruling authorities, because they didn't select him. He wasn't supposed to be there. So what they've got to do is at least neutralize him, and if possible, remove him. Because even as ineffective as he's been, and this is where I do part ways. Look, I love all those people you see at his rally. I love the spirit coming from them. I love their patriotism. I love their appeal to a traditional American identity. But the fact is, they think he's actually performing. They think he's actually doing the things he said. They think that wall is being built. He thinks they think he's stopping the illegal immigration. They think he's pulling our troops out of Syria and Afghanistan. They think he's doing all these wonderful things. And the fact of the matter, all he's doing is shooting off his mouth.
Yeah, some people even think he's the modern day Cyrus. He's the embodiment of King David, and he's the savior of the Jews.
I think the only people who believe that are two groups. One, obviously, are the
Christian right.
The Christian right, the evangelical Christians. And in fact, I was listening to a Christian radio station in Virginia a couple of weeks ago. Very strong pro-Trump people, love Trump, and they're basically calling him a traitor because he was pulling the troops out of Syria, they thought, and that was a shot at Israel, and that was the worst possible thing in the world. So there's a complete disconnect between, I would say, their heartland American patriotism and their, for want of a better word, idolatry when it comes to Israel. So you have that on the Christian right. Plus, obviously, you have some fairly major Jewish figures, Sheldon Adelson and a few others that want him to do what they want him to do when it comes to Israel, moving the capital, Golan Heights, and all of those things. And, so yeah, fine. That they could say new Cyrus and all that. I don't think that's what most of his voters were asking for. They were asking for America first, not Israel first, not Saudi Arabia first, not Ukraine first, but America first.
Well, given that a lot of people depend on the 401k for retirement, given that the market is a primary propellant engine for a 401k, certainly Trump is trying to connect the two. He's trying to create the illusion that there have been more jobs created than ever before, that he has done more than Abraham Lincoln. This kind of apotheosis of the grand general, who was a draft dodger. The point is this: you have two extremes. You have one group that wants him to be the paragon of leadership, and then you have, on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who want to invoke the 25th Amendment and put him away because he's not all there. And I just read here a report from a former congressman who says that House GOP members are absolutely disgusted and exhausted by Trump's behavior. They just can't put up with it anymore. It's too much.
Well, again, Paul, this is another place where we might part ways a little bit. I understand why regular Americans feel this way about Trump, even though they're not informed really about what's actually going on the policy front. I mean, I get this all the time about his appointments where people sort of wink and nod and say, keep your friends close and your enemies closer, like they're saying something wise and clever, and he's got it all thought out. But when it comes to Republican office holders, not so much the House even, but the Senate, they're bad news, Republicans, because what they want is they don't like flyover country. They hate flyover country even more than the Democrats do, because they have to rely on their votes while taking money from their donors. And what they care about, if you look at the three things that Trump departed from Republican orthodoxy on: free trade, open borders, and endless wars. They hate him on all of those things. If there were ever a secret vote on impeachment in the Senate, he'd be out on his ear, because at least half those Republicans would want to get rid of him so they can have a nice Mike Pence or some other, Jeb Bush clone. in the Oval Office instead, because that's what they want. They want to go back to normalcy, where nobody like Trump is rocking the boat. I wrote a thing a couple of years ago called Mikhail Octavian Trump, about, is Trump going to be Mikhail Gorbachev and bring down what's the rest left of America, or is he going to be Octavian and inaugurate a new era in restoring the republic? The hope was he would do the latter. Instead, I think he's ending up doing the former. But you get your Caesars where you find them. There is no other one, as far as I can see.
Yeah. I mean, you find even former proponents, former surrogates of Trump now stabbing him in the back, like Tucker Carlson.
I don't think, where's Tucker stabbed in the back?
Well, I don't know if you heard him recently. He said he described Trump as a liar and a full-blown BS artist. That's who he is. He's a salesman.
Well, he's certainly the. Oh, I did hear that. Yeah, but I think he was.
Well, I can send you the link.
I think I did hear him say that. I think he wasn't stabbing him in the back. He was saying, "Hey, the guy talks. He likes to shoot off his mouth."
Yeah, he says he's a talker, a boaster, a booster, a compulsive self-promoter. He's full-blown BS artist. That's what Carlson said.
Well, I don't think stabbing him in the back. I think it's a description that even his fans know is true, and they love it.
They love him for that, huh?
Yeah. And look, again, Paul, whatever you say, Trump this, Trump that, I guess the question I always have to ask is, compared to whom? And I cannot think of a single person who's a possible contender for the presidency, Republican or Democrat.
I can think of one.
Who?
I'm talking to him.
Oh, no. No. I say
I can think of better people.
A conceivable contender. Again, politics is not beanbag. You have to have somebody who actually has a possibility of getting there, who could do better. And I can't think of a single one. Not a single one.
Look, I know, Jim. I know. What I'm saying is, as far as character, as far as personality, there are certain elements that have to be in place in a package when you're branding somebody as president. Forget the money. Let's say we had election reform and we could have anybody run a campaign without having to rely on super PACs, and there was a fair shake for everybody. Then you'd have a chance. You'd have a shot. Now you don't have a shot because nobody's going to pony up the money. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Well, you're talking about okay. The system is so messed up, nobody could get in. That's true. But even if it were not messed up, who could get in who would actually be doing better than he's doing? I can't think of anybody.
I'm baffled, bewildered, and mesmerized by that statement. Who could do better? Who could do better? Okay.
Okay, name me a Republican who would do a better job. One Republican who's a national. Mitt Romney?
No.
I mean, come on. Start going down the list. Send it back to Mexico, I say.
No. Look, I mean, it's food for thought. I mean, if we want to, go into a think tank mode and start thinking about potential contenders, we'll come up with somebody.
Start going down the list. I mean, there are people I like. Rand Paul, for example. Maybe he could do a good job on some things. Maybe not. I'm not sure he could do a better job than Trump is doing.
It doesn't have to be from the right. See, this is, again, part of the divisive politics we have here. It's either right or left. It doesn't have to be. I mean, we have corporate welfare now as we speak, with the bailouts, quantitative easing, farm bailouts, you name it, it's there, okay? So you're telling me that we're not sort of socialist? You could have...
Again, a point of departure here where we probably part ways on a couple of things. One is you talk about our electoral system as though this republic can be saved, and I don't think it can. You talk about right and left as though we're a question of economics, tax policies, corporations.
No, it's more than that.
I don't think that's the issue. I think the real issue is the social, cultural, and national issue, which means anybody on the left is for two things. One is the destruction of the historic American nation by importing a new ethnos into the United States and destroying the existing ethnos. And the other one is degrading not only the morality, but individual lives by promoting things like LGBT ideology as a mandatory standard within our society. Everybody, I don't care about their corporate welfare position if they're for those two things, and everybody on the left is.
You
So
know
you have
that you know that Twitter just announced a new policy. It will allow the depiction of children, nude children, on Twitter, as long as it is done artistically, even in compromising sexual positions. Can you believe that?
I,
Talk
I, I
about the slippery slide.
I believe that. And by the way, just a little footnote here, back to Trump in Europe and all that. Apparently, he's slapping sanctions on France because France is doing something that would impose some kind of a tax or something on our tech companies. So Trump is Johnny on the spot to penalize the French for doing that because it hurts these tech companies that are busy censoring all his supporters from their platforms. How does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Listen, there's so much to go over here on Trump. I know that you're trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. You're trying to give him some slack. You're trying to tell us nobody could have done it better with what he's working with.
Oh, no, I'm sorry if I gave that impression. Yeah, I think he could have done things a lot better. What I'm saying is, I don't think there's anybody else who has either the inclination or the possibility of doing it better that I can identify that actually could get there. Because the left is all horrible. They would destroy this country by opening the borders and by pushing the LGBT stuff even farther, abortion and all the rest of it. And that anybody on the right would be not a reluctant warmonger, but an enthusiastic one. No more talk about getting out of Syria or Afghanistan, which Trump hasn't managed to do, but at least he says he wants to. Everybody else would be completely, no holds barred imperialist, and we probably would have a world war if any of those other guys were in office.
Well, how many miles of the wall has he built so far?
Zero, as far as I know.
2?
Zero, as far as I know.
Zero.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's some parts that they have evidently replaced or upgraded that you might be able to count. I don't know how many miles that is, but he hasn't done it. But then again, would any other Republican even think about doing it?
Have you seen the? Sorry to interrupt you, but have you seen the article where they've been able to cut through the wall with a reciprocating saw?
Yeah.
$100 saw. This is the design that this incredible stable genius with unfathomable wisdom.
Again, Paul, you're complaining he hasn't built what he said he would do, or that it doesn't work, as opposed to everybody else who wouldn't want to do it in the first place.
I mean, there are so many different things that could have been done differently.
I agree. I agree 100%. Look, he could have sent the army down to the border. You've seen Doug McGregor on Tucker's show a lot. He said in so many words and has drawn up a plan of how the army could be deployed on the border to close the border. Does Trump even know he can do that? I don't think he does.
No. The thing that's most disturbing for me is the constant flip-flopping, the constant obfuscation, the constant subterfuge that goes on in his politics and his policies.
I agree. He's thrashing around. It's all Sturm und Drang about this and that. And if he gets reelected, it'll be 4 more years of turmoil. That's all it'll be. And then we can go straight down with the path to decline with no obstacles after he's gone.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that Russia's end game is to try and create as much discord, as much division along ethnic, along economic, along political lines in America to create this balkanization? Because the last thing they would want is a unified nation that is centered around certain values, certain morals, that bring it together and push it forward into the future. A balkanized nation cannot move forward very fast.
Look, from what I've seen of actual Russian operations on anything, and I have 2 things in mind. One is the Veselnitskaya meeting at Trump Tower with, incredibly inept. They wanted to talk about the Magnitsky sanctions. We'll fool Americans. We tell them we talk about international adoption. This will fool them. This is Boris and Natasha level of ineptitude here. That's the kind of thing I've seen from the Russians. The idea that there's any kind of clever Russian plot to sow discord among the Americans, because otherwise we'd all be holding hands and singing kumbaya, kumbaya is ridiculous, in my opinion. The Russians, I think, have changed their focus toward the United States in the last 10 years or so. Before, let's say 2010 roughly, I think their idea was they still were holding out hope that we could be some kind of partner for them, that they thought they could have a partnership with Europe and America that would be focused largely on the threat of terrorism toward the global south, that there would be, if you will, a kind of a real northern alliance of the European countries and from America to Russia, and this was their natural orientation. I think that turned during the course of the subsequent years, especially 2014 in Ukraine, and rather than their focus is that we are a strategic threat to Russia, NATO is a strategic threat, and that if war is not inevitable, it's increasingly probable, and that they have to prepare for it. And that's what I think they're thinking is. I think they have exactly zero to do with all this crap about sowing discord inside the United States. I think that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. Not you,
Okay.
but I mean.
Let me give you another tack here. Apart from what you just said, we have the overt public face of.
Just to finish there, I think they would like to see a healthy, national-minded, sane United States, and I think they are frankly mystified. I don't know if you saw Rod Dreher, who American conservative, recently went to Russia. He said, "Try explaining drag queen story hour to Russia. Just try it."
Okay.
It doesn't. They think we have literally lost our mind in this country, and of course they're correct. And I don't think they like that. I think a lot of Russians are well disposed toward America and Americans, but they feel that as a country, as a state, as an actor on the world stage, we are in the hands of a bunch of lunatics, and they don't mean Trump necessarily.
Okay, you have the overt public face of Russia through Putin, Lavrov, the whole kabuki theater that is shown every day. But you also have the oligarchs in Russia. You also have the gangs in Russia. You have the criminal elements in Russia, the billionaires who know how to blackmail, who know how to leverage people in politics, whether Russian politics, Ukrainian politics, U.S. politics. They have ways and means to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not as if it's a Pollyanna world in Russia. In fact, Russia is just opening up its borders with China. They're building all kinds of bridges to increase cross-border shopping, et cetera, et cetera. And yet China is predominantly an atheistic country that is, incriminating and imprisoning Christians, Muslims into concentration camps, torturing them. And yet here's Russia, Orthodox Russia, doing business with this nation. Right. There must be some elements in Russia that want this to be done, because it doesn't make sense.
It makes perfect sense. Look, if you're in Moscow and you're looking at, first off, the fact that you have a solid wall of hatred, irrational hostility coming from your natural partners, America and Europe, you say, okay, fine, that door is closed. What do we do now? Whom can we work with? Where are our natural friends, given the fact that door is closed? And they look around. They see Iran. They see China. These countries do not share their same ideology. Culturally, civilizationally, they're very different, but they also have some natural elements of partnership. For example, the Chinese big agenda, of course, is the Belt and Road Initiative, that would unite all of Eurasia and eventually including Europe as well. There's only one way, really, that works, and that's through Russia. It's a natural alliance of interests in terms of economic and integration, especially since it helps to protect them from the country that is implacably hostile to Russia and increasingly hostile to China. Why wouldn't they work together? Of course they will. It makes perfect sense for them to do so. And also consider, too, if you had a border of 2,500 miles with another huge country, a very powerful country with nuclear weapons, you've got two choices. You can be hostile to that country that would consume all of your time and energy figuring out how to manage that hostility and possibility of even going to war with that country, which would be disastrous for both of them, or you can find out where are our natural points of cooperation and mutual benefit, and let's work on those. I mean, it's like saying, "Oh, we better off with Canada as a friend or Canada as an enemy." If Canada were 3 times its population and had nuclear weapons, I think we'd rather be friends with them, wouldn't we?
Okay. You made a comment here recently on Twitter about Russia. Let me just skip to it. You said, "Will Nord Stream 2's completion signal the end of Europe's submission to maniac Cold War II obsessions of Washington deep state coup meisters? Let's hope so." You think this is where we're going with Russia? They're trying to diffuse this Cold War rhetoric, diffuse the prospects, the imminent prospect of war.
I think so, and everybody wants to say Trump. Obviously, Trump. Putin is his master chess player. I don't think he is. I think he tends to be reactive of things. Like, for example, I thought it was caught flat-footed in Ukraine in 2014. He then, I'm sure that, like, we have contingency plans on everything. They have contingency plans. They said, okay, activate Plan 23 and Plan 43. In response to that, just like we would do under similar circumstances, whether a hostile coup in Ottawa or Mexico City or something. What I think they're trying to do, and I think the Chinese as well, is I think they are trying to avoid a world war. And the only way they can see to do that, and frankly, the only way I see to do that, and I'm sad to say this, is that there would have to be some kind of massive financial dislocation in the world that bumps the dollar off of its position as the world's reserve currency. Probably would have horrendous domestic effects here, make 2008 look like a picnic. But the international side effect of that would be we can't bully people around anymore. We can't tell the Germans and the French and the British and the Japanese and the Koreans what to do, or else we'll sink your currency. At that point, people start cutting their own deals with the Russians and the Chinese, and it leaves Washington to flail helplessly as these elements disengage from the global hegemon. That could force us to face reality. The downside to that is that it also could trigger panic among our deep state, where they essentially push the war button because
Samson option.
The Samson option. Yes. So there is that risk, but I think if that doesn't happen and we keep going along this course, a war, as I say, is not inevitable but increasingly probable. One of the things that was written by an analyst, I'm trying to remember who it was, he said the difference between the Russians and the American leadership is that the Russians are afraid of war, but they're prepared for it. The American leaders are not afraid of war and they're not prepared for it. And that's extremely dangerous and irresponsible.
Yeah, Americans are mesmerized by American Idol.
And I'm not, you're talking ordinary Americans. What I'm afraid of, I wanted to ask all those people we saw testifying at the House hearings and say, okay, our policy toward Russia should be one of implacable hostility, constant sanctions, encircling them with military forces, and pressure. What do you expect that to lead to? What is your end game? And I don't think they even necessarily articulate it in their own minds, except that the only thing it can lead to is some kind of a collapse where either Russia will back down from what it regards as its vital natural and national interest, which it will not do, or there will be some kind of collapse, regime change, something of that sort, like we're trying to do in Iran right now. And I don't think that's likely to happen either. So if those two things don't happen and we can't win with maximum pressure, like we apply to Venezuela, North Korea, Iran, whoever, we can't bring the Russians to their knees. Where must that policy lead eventually? And it only can lead to war.
Totally. I mean, look at North Korea. They're still firing missiles. As far as the dollar, there is a path forward to the devaluation of the dollar. China is trading in yuan. They created a new market that bypasses the SWIFT mechanism.
Yeah.
banking SWIFT. Russia is trading in rubles. They are they're they're
And
selling
they're
off
buying gold
treasuries.
like buying gold like there's no tomorrow. Yeah.
They're buying gold like there's no tomorrow. Exactly. The Fed just pumped 90, almost $100 billion in short-term liquidity in the markets to prop up the markets. Trump is gloating that the markets are at an all-time high. People don't realize how much pumping the Fed is involved in,
Yeah.
in propping up these markets.
Look,
So it's all smoke and mirrors.
he was even pushing Powell to adopt negative interest rates like they have in Europe already. What kind of crazy country has negative interest rates? What does that tell you about the health of an economy that you have to throw out free money to the big corporations and penalize people for saving in order to try to stimulate the economy? What does that tell you?
What does that tell you when you're doing trade with Saudi Arabia, for example,
Yeah.
to prop up your petrodollar? You remember Saddam Hussein, he tried to divert from the dollar
Yeah.
and use euros. And that was the main reason they brought him down. Muammar Gaddafi, he tried to prop up a gold-backed dinar for all the African countries in that region. Look what happened to him.
Yeah.
That was the reason they took him out.
And,
The dollar has to be kept afloat at all
and of course,
costs.
that involves this petrodollar, involves the Saudis. But you see the Saudis playing kissy face with the Russians now too. What if they decide this ship is sinking? It's time to start playing ball with the other boys. What does that do to the dollar then?
Yeah. Now,
See, that's one of the problems with our diplomacy too, Paul, is that you notice the Russians talk to everybody. They talk to the Israelis. They talk to the Iranians. They talk to the Saudis, the Chinese, the Venezuelans, all of our friends they talk to, and all of our enemies they talk to. North Korea, they talk to the South Koreans. They have a very good relation with the South Koreans. We can't do that. We have to look at the world through good and bad. Israel good, Iran bad. Ukraine good, Russia bad, and so on and so forth. We have no diplomacy to speak of anymore.
and how many countries has Russia placed sanctions on?
They don't. They
Zero.
don't.
China?
No. But there was a report the other day that the Russians may be planning, if General Haftar comes to power in Libya, to have a military base in Libya to outflank NATO. You mean, so in addition to their base in Syria, they would have one other base to match the dozens of bases we have around the Mediterranean, and that would outflank us. I mean, what kind of infidel nonsense do you have to believe in to write a story like that?
Can you imagine if Russian troops landed in the United States, claimed some oil wells as their own, and started pumping oil, extracting it for their own use? I mean, this is what we're doing to Syria.
Yeah.
This is completely illegal under international law.
Of course, and again, this is where we may differ. I think Trump is probably sincere. He wants to get out of there. He has no idea how to do it because he is hostage to the people he appointed.
Doesn't know how to do it, or he's told how not to do it.
Well, whatever. But then again, he keeps coming back to it. I want to do this. I want to do this. Why would he do that unless that's what he really wanted to do? Because most people don't know. As far as his supporters go, they cheer him no matter what he did.
They couldn't care less.
Yeah, but he
they
keeps coming back to it, which makes me think he's sincere about it. But I could be wrong.
Talk to me a little bit about Israel. There's been this Benny Gantz, blue-white party trying to get a coalition happening with the Likud. It's not happening. Netanyahu was indicted. Now he's hoping the Knesset is going to give him immunity over the next, I believe it's next 30 days. He has 30 days. If not, there's going to be a third election.
Right.
Sometime in February. What do you think the odds are that Israel would spark a war with Iran just to divert our attention from this kabuki theater that's going on in Israeli politics, and pull the U.S. into it too? Drag into it.
I think that danger is there. I don't know if it's more of a danger that they would spark a war for that purpose, or specifically Netanyahu would do so himself if he thinks he's going down and going to jail, and that that would be something where he exercises the Samson option, or whether it's more useful to him and to Likud to maintain that tension, maintain that possibility, rather than actually pull the trigger on it. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, obviously, with regard to the Israeli political situation, the real issue is Avigdor Lieberman, because he's the one who's been holding up the grand coalition. He was the former Polish coalition partner with Netanyahu. As I understand the results of the last election, Avigdor Lieberman could still form a government with Netanyahu if he wanted to, but he doesn't want to. I don't think he could throw his support to Gantz and form a coalition without somebody else. And he's been pushing for the grand coalition between Likud and Gantz, which evidently is not going to happen. So, I'm not an expert in Israeli politics,
Either.
but it seems to me it's extremely unstable. I would tend to be more comfortable if Netanyahu were more removed from the scene, because that, at least in the most proximate sense, gets rid of the most immediate partner for not only Trump but also Kushner here in Washington, and also for Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. But maybe Gantz would play ball with the same guys. I mean, Israeli interests would tend to fall along the same lines anyway, even with a new leader.
Well, Likud, I think, does need a new leader. Netanyahu has run his course. There's no way on earth he should remain in that party as leader.
Yeah, and of course there are elements within Likud that would love to throw him to the wolves and take over the leadership themselves, but I don't think they have the strength to do it.
No. Speaking of Kushner, he has been demoted from his Middle East post, and he's now in charge of constructing the wall on the southern border.
Well, I guess that means no wall.
And as of today, I saw this article on Veterans Today, which is published by Gordon Duff. And apparently Trump wants Kushner as vice president to replace Pence, because here's the oh my God punchline, because he thinks that Kushner is the Jewish Messiah.
I thought that was Menachem Schneerson.
He thinks Kushner is.
Well, I thought that's right, because Trump is Cyrus. It's hard to keep things straight.
It's in today's article, front page.
Let's just say, Paul, I'd be very surprised if that were the case. I think it's unlikely he will. Again, I don't think it's absolutely clear he will make it through impeachment. By the way. Everybody is counting that as a done deal. I think it's likely at this stage, with what we know now, they're not going to remove him. Between now and the trial, I don't know what else will be out there, because I think the Dems are shooting with real bullets on this.
Well, the courts have also adjudicated today that he must release his tax returns. So
no, I think they're waiting for an aha moment that will cause enough Republican senators to say, "Well, I want to support the president, but I can't defend that." I mean, we're not looking at a Clinton impeachment pattern. We're looking at a Nixon impeachment pattern. They're trying to flip enough Republicans that he will have to resign. That's what they're trying to do.
Well, a lot of it depends on their base too. What does their base want?
No, it doesn't, and that's where I think a lot of people are wrong. I think there are a lot of people saying, "Well, Trump's base isn't going to support him." These are Republican senators. They don't give a damn about their base. They hate their base. They hate their base even more than the Democrats hate their base. If there was, like I said, if there was a secret vote in the Senate, Trump would be out on his ear, no question. Those Republicans would vote against him. Now, are they afraid of their voters? They're afraid of being primaried and all that? Yeah, but remember, I think there are 5 Republicans currently in the Senate who are not running for re-election anyway, and there are a whole bunch of others, including Mitt Romney, who aren't up till 2024. And they, with the contempt they have for their voters, they would say to themselves, they won't remember in 2024, and maybe a lot of them aren't running for re-election either. So their donors may have a different point of view than what their voters do, as is the case. And I don't rule out some of those guys could flip on him if the right ammunition comes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You also heard about the mutual defense agreement that Trump is trying to hammer out with Israel.
I had not heard that. In a way, it's kind of odd, because Israel has more reliance on the United States than virtually all the countries we have
I
treaties with.
know,
A
but
treaty would be kind of a downgrade.
it sounds romantic. Um, then also the foreign minister of Israel has called for all hackers to hack Iran's computers so that people can have access to the internet. This is the latest and the greatest. Uh,
Yeah,
Apparently, the Iranians have been silenced due to the protests. Um, I don't know about Iran. I think Iran has already made its decision to strike if it's ever uh, confronted. It has made its policy to strike 21 U.S. bases
hmm
throughout the Middle East. It's not going to sit back. It's not like Iraq, Iran. It's a totally different animal.
no, that's right. I mean, I think that there are a lot of indications from the U.S. military that they would rather not do something like this. So we tend to try to keep our carriers away from the Strait of Hormuz when tensions are rising because they're afraid that they would be taken out if
Right.
facilities and as you said, these bases would be struck. But I think also the Iranians realize that we would inflict tremendous devastation on Iran. Would that cause the Iranian government or Iran as a state to collapse? I don't think it would, and I don't see any way we could occupy Iran the way we occupied Iraq.
Oh, no way. No, no way. And also, did you hear about Jordan? They're trying to create military exercises in case they have to attack Israel.
Oh, I did see that. Yes, yes. Well, that's the way it was being portrayed in the media. I don't know how accurate that is. I mean, again, all sorts of countries have all sorts of military contingency plans, and
But
maybe they could be construed that way, but I don't know if that's true.
Jordan has just returned back some land that was leased from Israel, I believe,
hmm
some tracts of land. Lebanon is in the throes of an economic meltdown. You've heard about the banks,
Yeah.
people going for their cash. What's the situation there? Do you have any inroads?
No, not really. I mean, as I recall, all this started having to do with fees on cell phone service and things like that, which evidently are quite expensive in,
Okay,
uh, in Lebanon. The Western media likes to portray this, and Western governments too. This is all directed against Hezbollah, it's directed against the Iranians. Maybe there's some element of truth to that, just like the demonstrations in Iraq. And you also have to ask yourself, like the in Iran, in Iraq, in Lebanon, as we saw in the past, in Venezuela and Ukraine and other places,
Bolivia.
where is the line between what are genuine indigenous questions of discontent, which are present in many countries, every country to a greater or lesser degree, and where is the element of outside stoking of the fires, pouring gasoline on the fire? And that's what we don't often know. I saw with respect to Iran, for example, I saw a clip purporting to show, I don't know if it's true or not, a gunman shooting at both sides, police and
Hmm.
demonstrators during the demonstration, which is what was documented and even admitted, unofficially by some American officials that there was somebody shooting at both sides in 2014, and they sure as hell weren't working for the government. There were people.
Uh, that sounds like the Rothschilds funding both sides of a war.
Well,
Uh,
yeah, or people at a certain facility down the Potomac here that
right.
have experience with this sort of thing.
Did you read what Pompeo said about the U.S. helping legitimate Latin American governments to prevent protests from morphing into riots?
Yeah, well, they're riots if we support the government. They're democracy in action if we don't. I mean, it's this same kind of Manichaean black and white mindset we see in everything else. You notice there's no criticism of the French police and the yellow vests,
Well, it depends
which
what
are
that country has to offer as far as resources, right? I mean, if they're only growing cabbages, we have no national security interests in
we
that
met
country.
we met issue.
But if it's lithium, hey, that's a different story. If it's oil,
I,
maybe.
I, I think I think there are more people in Washington that could use some lithium.
Yeah, my dad was on lithium. Yeah, he was bipolar.
By the way, you know that used to be the secret ingredient in Seven Up.
Oh,
It was really great stuff back in those days. This was like a century ago. You can still buy lithium water online though.
really?
Natural lithium water. Yeah.
Did you know that the Fanta orange drink was developed in Germany by Hitler?
I did not know.
There you go. Uh,
They also had the first public television broadcast in the world.
right,
Yeah, in
right.
the 30s. Yeah.
Now, here's another interesting factoid. Turkey and Libya have joined forces and have usurped territories in the Mediterranean Sea
Hmm.
for oil drilling,
Right.
to the chagrin of Egypt and Cyprus and Greece.
And Israel.
Greece is, imploring NATO to do something. They're appealing to the powers that be. Do you think NATO is going to intervene? Do you think there is a solution to this, or is Turkey just going to walk all over the Mediterranean and invoke?
How can NATO intervene since it requires unanimity and Turkey is a NATO member?
Well, there you go. It also includes Israeli waters too. So
Yeah.
it's not just.
Well, first off, to answer your initial question, no, I don't think NATO can do anything about it. Will the United States or certain other European countries that are NATO countries do something on their own? I don't know. It is interesting to look at the dynamic in the Eastern Mediterranean. As we know, for years and years, the Israeli-Turkish relationship was very close. Now it's not very close at all, and that's why Israel's decided to play the Greek card with their energy diplomacy towards Cyprus and Greece. By the way, that's also what accounts for the passage of the Armenian genocide resolution a couple of weeks ago. If you'll remember that resolution, which I support as a historical concept. Yes, there was an Armenian genocide perpetrated by the Ottoman Empire that the Turks will not admit.
There was also a Greek genocide in Smyrna.
Yes, and Greek and Syrians and other Christian groups within and as you know, of Greek origin myself.
I'm Greek too.
Yes, exactly. And now, that having been said, it was bottled up because of the Israel lobby, which did not want it passed for many years because Turkey was their major friend, Israel's close friend in the Eastern Mediterranean, and they didn't want to do anything to offend the Turks. Now that Turkey is essentially a lost cause, those interests flipped. They all then came out in support of the resolution, and it went through, like greased lightning. It simply shows that it has more to do with the lobbying in Washington and who's on which side than the historical merits of the matter.
So you're saying basically that Turkey is going to play the law of conquest card, to the victors go the spoils kind of thing.
Where, in Libya?
In the Mediterranean, or for the oil drilling.
No, I think what they're doing is, at least in the initial steps, the proximate steps, is they are taking a different interpretation of the law of the sea, having to do with continental shelf and which areas belong to which countries. I think on its merits, their position is not a very good one. But then again, the law is on the side of the big guns, and Turkey's got bigger guns than Cyprus does. And of course, Cyprus is not a NATO member. Remember, by the way, Turkey is still occupying 38% of Cyprus.
Oh yeah, I understand.
Yeah. So they're basically saying, well, if the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, which only Turkey recognizes, is a sovereign state, which nobody but Turkey says it is, it would have the following continental shelf that would give us access to the following exploratory waters. Of course, neither Cyprus nor anybody else accepts that. But if Turkey insists on that interpretation and acts on it, who's going to do something about it?
Well, that's what Turkey's betting on, that nobody's going to do anything about it.
Yeah.
And that's why it keeps on importing the S-400s from Russia.
Yeah.
To the chagrin of Trump. And I think, with Jamal Khashoggi, who passed away in that Turkish embassy, I think that Turkey knows a few things about how this all went down and why Khashoggi had to be snuffed out. Khashoggi was working for the Washington Post, wasn't he?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I'll tell you, I get a little tired of all these crocodile tears about Khashoggi. I mean, here are the Saudis killing half of Yemen, and nobody gives a damn. But
Nobody gives a damn.
if,
Yeah.
if a deep state, if a CIA, Muslim Brotherhood, Washington Post asset comes up on the wrong side of some shady political dealings with some very bad people, um, oh, we're all supposed to get very, very upset. At MBS, which stands, by the way, for more bone saw.
Which
It's
for what?
MBS. MBS stands for more bone saw.
Oh,
Um,
okay, that's a
in other words,
macabre kind
look,
of.
I'm not saying that killing Khashoggi was a good thing. I don't. I have no particular feeling about him one way or the other. But in terms of bad governments that go around doing bad things, that's pretty small on the list of charges.
Well, I find it very interesting how Erdogan was able to twist Trump's arm and
Oh yeah.
come over to the White House for a visit and get all kinds of concessions. It seems to me rather peculiar.
This fits into your theory that somebody has something on it.
You think maybe? I don't know.
One never knows, do one?
No one knows. No. I don't want to speculate because it's neither here nor there. Things will happen as they'll happen. So we come basically to a full hour here, Jim. I know we could go on and on about other aspects of the Middle East. Is there anything else you want to add to that dynamic?
No, not really to the Middle East, or we might say the broader Middle East, which goes from Libya to Afghanistan, basically.
Right.
So the place is a mess. It's going to stay a mess for a long time. We should be disengaging. We really have no vital national interest there. If we had an America First policy, we'd be basically washing our hands of the region. That ain't going to happen.
You think there's a slight chance, let's say a 1 in a billion chance that Trump will call on Kushner to be his vice president, and then if Trump is impeached for some reason, Kushner becomes the president?
I would say the chances of that are
astronomical.
Well under 1%, and that's putting it generously.
Okay. I have the same feeling too.
Yeah.
I pray it never happens because it'll be a very sad day for America.
Yeah. Although I suppose on certain matters, you'd hardly be able to tell the difference.
True. Look, I hope we can do this again as time permits. I know you're very busy and you have a lot of assignments and everything. Is there a website people can focus on?
No, I haven't really. Unfortunately, for personal reasons, I just haven't been able to keep up with.
Okay.
Because I still do the interviews on RT when I'm invited to do so, and I think the main thing is Twitter. That's my major platform. That's something I can do without thinking too much and
Sure.
prep and do it. So that's at Jim Jatras is the best way to find me for my
Right.
various pearls of wisdom, such as they are.
Right.
They're non-gem quality pearls, but there you have it.
And this video will be uploaded on YouTube and also on my website, which is discuss.com, dyskuss.com. So you'll be able to revisit this video if you wish at your leisure. Jim, I want to thank you once more. It's been an honor and a privilege to discuss things with you. And I still think there's a chance that you could run. Given the right circumstances and the right dynamic, there's a chance. I never say no.
Well, Paul, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it. I do sort of wonder about your grasp on reality when you say things like that, but it's I suppose you'll be in good company if that's the case.
Well, I believe in the David and Goliath story. I believe that the greater the odds against something happening, the more it could possibly happen.
I tend to disagree.
Okay. All right.
I think sadly most future events are sadly depressingly predictable. and until some major rupture, some big boom occurs that nobody anticipated, and then everybody says, "What the hell just happened?"
Yeah, yeah. All right, my friend. Thank you so much.
Paul, thank you, my friend.
Take care.